Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. When I was 17, a little while after my grandfather died, I had an experience that still sits in the back of my mind because of how quiet and ordinary it seemed at first. It was not loud. Nothing moved across the room. No object fell. No voice spoke. There was no dramatic shadow standing over my bed or anything like that. It was simply the feeling that someone was there, and that feeling was so clear that I acted on it without questioning it. My grandfather had not been gone for very long. He was my mother's dad, and his death had affected the family in that heavy way grief does. A house can feel different after someone dies, even if that person did not live there. People move through rooms more quietly. Conversations feel softer. Everyone carries their own private thoughts. Sometimes the sadness is obvious, and sometimes it is just in the air, sitting over normal life like a thin layer of dust. You still wake up, eat breakfast, go to school, talk to people, and do the things you have to do. But underneath it all, something has changed. I was 17, so I was old enough to understand death, but still young enough that the world felt like it should follow certain rules. People died, people grieved, and life carried on. I was not looking for signs or messages. I was not expecting anything strange. I was not someone who woke up every morning thinking spirits might be nearby. I was just a teenager trying to get through normal life after a family loss. It happened one morning before my 7 a.m. alarm. I was slowly waking up. Not fully awake yet, but not fully asleep either. It was that strange middle place where your body is still heavy and your mind is starting to rise toward the surface. You know you are in your room. You know morning is close. You can feel the shape of the day waiting for you, but you are still comfortable enough that you do not want to move yet. I had not opened my eyes properly. I was just drifting upward from sleep. Then, I felt someone in the room. It was not a sound that woke me. It was not footsteps or breathing. It was a presence. That is the only word that fits. I felt someone standing in the corner of my room by the door, looking at me. Not in a threatening way exactly, but in a watchful way. It felt like someone had come in quietly and was checking on me while I slept. The feeling was so normal at first that I immediately assumed it was my mother. That made sense to me in the moment. My grandfather had died recently, and because he was her father, I thought maybe she was more anxious than usual. Maybe she had woken up early, gone to the bathroom, and stopped by my room on her way back to check that I was okay. It was not something she did often, but grief can make people do things they would not normally do. Parents worry more after a loss. They look at their children differently. They remember how fragile everything is. So in my half-awake mind, I pictured her standing there quietly, just making sure I was all right. It was June, so the room was not dark. That matters to me. This did not happen in the middle of a pitch-black night where every corner could become something else. The early morning light was already beginning to fill the room. It was that pale kind of light that comes before the day is fully awake. Not bright sunlight yet, but enough to see shapes, walls, furniture, and the door. The room was nearly light, and that made the feeling even more confusing when I finally opened my eyes. I woke up more fully, ready to speak to her. I expected to see my mother by the door, but no one was there. The corner was empty. For a moment, I just stared. I had been so sure someone was standing there that my mind struggled to accept the empty space. It was not like waking from a dream where the dream fades and you understand it was not real. The feeling of a person in the room had been clear and immediate. I had not been frightened because I believed it was my mother. But now that the room was empty, that same feeling turned strange. I sat up, confused. The door area was still. Nothing moved. There was no one slipping out into the hall. No sound of footsteps walking away. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But I could not shake the feeling that someone had stood in that corner only seconds earlier, watching me with quiet attention. I decided to go ask my mother. That was the most practical thing to do. If she had been in my room, she would say so, and the whole thing would make sense. Maybe she had walked away just before I opened my eyes properly. Maybe I missed her by a second. Maybe she had been standing there, then quietly left when she saw I was waking up. It would be a little odd, but not impossible. So I got up and headed down the hall. I went to her bedroom door and asked if she had just been in my room, but she did not answer right away because she was asleep. Not lightly asleep either. She was in a deep sleep. I had to wake her up to even ask the question, and when I did, she was so out of it that she did not understand what I was asking. I had to repeat myself 3 times, maybe more. That is how asleep she was. She was not pretending. She was not someone who had just stepped back into bed and was trying to act casual. She was deeply asleep. The kind of asleep where your brain takes a long time to come back online. That was when the situation became harder to dismiss. If she had just been in my room, she would not have been that deeply asleep. There would have been some sign that she had been awake. She might have been groggy, yes, but not confused to the point that I had to repeat the question over and over. She had clearly not been up and walking around a minute before. She had been asleep in her own bed. When she finally understood, she told me she had not been in my room. And I believed her. There was no reason for her to lie. The question was harmless. If she had checked on me, she would have simply said yes. But she had not. She had been sleeping deeply. She had no idea why I was asking. I stood there with no answer. That is the part that still bothers me. Nothing else happened. There was no second sign, no message, no dream where my grandfather appeared, no object moved, no voice from the corner. It was just that one moment, a presence by the door, the strong feeling of being watched or checked on, my assumption that it was my mother, the empty corner when I opened my eyes, then my mother in a deep sleep, nowhere near my room. I never got to the bottom of it. For a while, I tried to find normal explanations. Maybe I had been half asleep and dreaming. That is the easiest answer. And maybe it is right. The mind can do strange things when waking up. It can carry pieces of a dream into the room for a moment. It can create the feeling of someone nearby even when no one is there. People talk about sleep paralysis, waking dreams, and other strange experiences that happen between sleep and waking. Maybe this was something like that. But it did not feel like a dream. That is why I still remember it. It felt like a presence, not an image. I did not see a person. I felt one. I felt someone standing in a specific place, in the corner near the door, looking at me. The feeling was calm enough that I assumed it was my mother, but strong enough that I woke myself up to speak to her. It was not vague. It was not a passing thought. It was clear enough that I physically got out of bed and went to ask her about it. And then There was the timing. It happened not long after my grandfather died. I do not know if that means anything. Maybe grief made me more sensitive. Maybe my mind was processing the loss in some quiet, hidden way and created the feeling of someone checking on me. Maybe because the family had been affected by his death, some part of me expected my mother to be more protective or anxious, and that expectation shaped what I felt. That is possible. But part of me has always wondered if it was not my mother at all. Maybe it was my grandfather. I do not say that with certainty. I did not see him. I did not hear his voice. There was no clear sign that identified the presence as him. But the feeling was not threatening. It was watchful. It was quiet. It felt like someone standing there to check on me, not to scare me. And because it happened soon after his death, I cannot help wondering if he had come by in some way I did not understand. Maybe he was checking on the family. Maybe he was checking on me. Or maybe I only want that to be true because it is more comforting than the idea of an unknown presence standing by my bedroom door. That is the difficult thing about experiences like this. They are small, private, and impossible to prove. They do not give you enough evidence to say, this definitely happened. But they also leave you with a feeling that does not fade. You can explain it away logically, but the memory still feels different from an ordinary dream. You remember the room, the light, the exact place where the presence stood. You remember the certainty you felt before you knew no one was there. I remember the room being nearly light because it was June. I remember being half awake before my alarm. I remember the quiet sense of someone standing in the corner by the door. I remember thinking it was my mother and feeling no real fear at first. I remember opening my eyes to speak to her and being surprised by the empty room. I remember walking down the hall to ask her if she had been there. I remember having to wake her from such a deep sleep that I had to repeat the question several times before she understood. That was what convinced me she had not been there. And if she had not been there, then I do not know who was. It never happened again, at least not that I was aware of. I never woke up another morning with that same feeling. I never saw anyone standing in the corner. I never had another moment where I thought someone had come into my room and then vanished. It was only that once, which almost makes it stranger. If it had happened many times, I might have looked for a pattern. I might have blamed the house, or my sleep, or stress. But it happened once, shortly after my grandfather's death. And then, never again. That makes it feel like a visit. Maybe that is all it was, a quiet visit. No words, no dramatic goodbye, no proof. Just a presence standing near the door in the early morning light, checking on me before leaving. Or maybe it was simply my mind, half awake and grieving in a way I did not fully understand, creating a feeling so real that I got up and went looking for the person I thought had been there. I still do not know. All I know is that when I was 17, not long after my grandfather died, I woke before my alarm with the clear feeling that someone was standing in the corner of my room by the door, watching over me. I thought it was my mother. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. And when I went to ask her, she was so deeply asleep that I had to wake her and repeat the question again and again before she could even understand me. I never found out who or what I had felt in my room that morning, and I was never aware of it happening again. My town has a bridge that is supposedly haunted by a motorcyclist. Like a lot of small-town ghost stories, everybody has heard some version of it. People say a motorcyclist died there, or that his spirit still rides near the bridge, or that if you go there at night, you might see his headlight behind you. I do not even remember all the details now, and I am sure different people told the story different ways. That is how local legends work. They change depending on who is telling them. But the main idea was always the same. There was a haunted bridge, and the ghost was connected to a motorcycle. When you are a teenager and you like scary stuff, that kind of story feels like an invitation. A friend of mine and I were exactly the type of teens who would talk ourselves into going. We liked ghost stories, creepy places, late-night drives, and anything that gave us a little rush. We were not serious paranormal investigators or anything like that. We were just kids who liked being scared in that fun way, where you dare each other to go somewhere dark and then act braver than you really feel. The bridge was close enough to feel possible, and the story was known enough to make us curious. The problem was that we could not drive ourselves. So one night, we convinced my friend's sister to take us there. I do not know how much she believed the story, but she agreed to drive, which was all we needed. The plan was simple. We would go to the bridge, drive across it, maybe hang around long enough to say we did it, and then go home with a story. I think part of us wanted something to happen, because that is why we went. But another part of us probably hoped nothing would happen, because real fear is different from wanting a scare. The drive there was full of that nervous teenage energy. We talked about the story, joked around, probably tried to scare each other before we even got close. The darker the road got, the more real the legend started to feel. During the day, a haunted bridge is just a bridge. At night, especially when you are going there on purpose, it becomes something else. Every shadow looks deeper. Every turn in the road feels like it is leading you farther away from normal life. Even if you tell yourself you do not believe it, your body starts acting like it might. When we got to the bridge, nothing happened. That was almost disappointing at first. We drove through, waiting for something, anything. No strange figure. No sudden motorcycle sound, no lights behind us. No feeling of being chased. Just the road, the bridge, and the dark. It was uneventful. The kind of uneventful that makes you laugh afterward because you built it up so much in your head, then reality gives you nothing. I remember feeling that mix of relief and disappointment. We had gone there to investigate, but there was nothing to investigate. So we turned around to go home. That was when we saw the headlight. It came out of seemingly nowhere, some distance behind us. All three of us saw it. That is one of the reasons I still think about it. It was not just me staring out the window and catching something strange for half a second. My friend saw it. Her sister saw it. I saw it. A single motorcycle headlight appeared behind us on the road, back in the direction we had just come from. It was not there before. Then suddenly, it was. The first thought was obvious. Maybe someone on a motorcycle had turned onto the road behind us. That would have been normal enough. A person riding at night, maybe coming from a side road or a driveway, maybe just traveling the same road we were on. But the way it appeared felt strange. It did not feel like we had watched it approach from far away. It was just there, a single light in the dark, following behind us at a distance. Because of the legend, none of us ignored it. A single motorcycle headlight behind you after driving over a supposedly haunted bridge is the exact thing you do not want to see, even if part of you went there hoping for something like that. The mood in the car changed immediately. The joking stopped. Suddenly, we were all watching that light, trying to decide if it was really a motorcycle, trying to decide how close it was, trying to decide if it was catching up. It followed for a while as we drove. I do not remember hearing a motorcycle engine, but I do remember seeing the light. It was just one headlight, steady in the darkness. That made it feel even more like the story. Cars have two headlights. A motorcycle has one. The haunted bridge was supposed to be connected to a motorcyclist. And now, after nothing happened on the bridge itself, a single headlight had appeared behind us once we turned around to go home. Eventually, we turned onto another road. This road was somewhat longer, and it gave us a good view of the road we had just come from. That detail matters, because it means the motorcycle should not have just vanished from sight. We could still see the stretch behind us for over 1,000 feet. It was not like we turned a sharp corner into thick woods and lost all visibility. We had a long line of sight. If a motorcycle had been behind us, it should have continued down that road. It should have passed the turn. It should have kept going straight, or turned after us, or at least moved into a place where we could still see it. I remember telling my friend's sister to slow down. I wanted us to turn around and watch. I wanted to see if the light would pass. At that point, I think I was still trying to make it normal in my head. If it was just a real motorcycle, then it would come down the road and pass through the area we could still see. We would watch it, laugh nervously, and say, okay, that was creepy timing. But it was just a biker. That was the answer I wanted. So we slowed down and looked back. We waited for it to pass. It never did. The headlight did not come down the road. It did not turn where we turned. It did not continue straight through the stretch we could see. It did not appear anywhere it should have appeared. It was just gone. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling like a fun teenage scare and started feeling genuinely strange. Because if there had been a real motorcycle behind us, where did it go? It was not close enough to have already passed before we looked. It was not far enough away to disappear without us noticing. There were no obvious turns or places where it should have been able to vanish so cleanly, at least not from what I remember. And with that long visibility behind us, we should have seen something. But we saw nothing. The road was empty. I can still remember the feeling in the car, that nervous silence, the kind that happens when everyone saw the same thing, but nobody has a good explanation. Nobody wants to say the obvious thought out loud. Because once someone says it, the fear becomes real. We had gone looking for the haunted motorcyclist, and now a single motorcycle headlight had appeared behind us, and then disappeared in a way that did not make sense. I do not think we stayed around after that. The fun was over. It was one thing to drive to a spooky bridge and hope for a thrill. It was another thing to feel like something might have actually followed us. We went home, and I carried the memory with me. Over the years, I have tried to explain it. Maybe there was a side road we did not notice. Maybe the motorcycle turned off before we looked back carefully. Maybe the light was farther away than it seemed, and our sense of distance was wrong because it was dark. Maybe it was not a motorcycle at all, but a car with one headlight out. Maybe the road dipped or curved in a way that made it look like the light vanished. Maybe someone stopped or turned into a driveway. Maybe the whole thing felt stranger because we were already expecting something creepy. Those explanations are possible, but none of them fully satisfy me. The part I keep coming back to is that we still had visibility of the road we had just left for over 1,000 feet. That is a long distance. If a light had been behind us, we should have seen it continue. We were watching for it. We were not distracted anymore. We were actively looking. I specifically remember telling my friend's sister to slow down so we could watch and see if it passed. We wanted to catch the normal explanation in the act. We wanted to see the motorcycle go by and end the mystery. But there was nothing there. It just never appeared. That absence is what stayed with me more than the headlight itself. Seeing a strange light behind you at night is creepy, but lights can be explained. Not seeing it again when it should have been visible is the part that makes my stomach tighten when I remember it. It is like the road swallowed it. One moment there was a single headlight behind us. Then we turned, looked back with a clear view, and it was gone. Maybe that is how ghost stories are born. Not from huge dramatic events, but from little moments where something ordinary does one impossible thing. A motorcycle headlight on a road is ordinary. A haunted bridge legend is ordinary too, in a way, because every town has stories like that. But when the headlight appears at the exact place tied to the legend, at the exact time you are leaving, and then vanishes where it should not vanish, the ordinary parts start lining up in a way that feels wrong. I do not know what we saw that night. I am still unsure. Part of me thinks there must have been a real rider out there, someone whose timing was just strange enough to scare us. Maybe they turned off somewhere we did not see. Maybe our memory of the road is not perfect after all these years. That is the reasonable answer, and I know it. But another part of me remembers the silence in the car, the sudden appearance of that single headlight, the way all three of us saw it, the way we slowed down and turned to watch, the empty road behind us, the feeling that the thing we were waiting for had simply stopped existing. That is why the story still unsettles me. It was not wild. It was not movie-level scary. Nothing chased us. No figure appeared on the bridge. No motorcycle roared past our window. No ghost stood in the road. It was only a light, seen from a distance, on a dark road after a visit to a supposedly haunted bridge. But sometimes that is enough. Sometimes one light appearing where it should not, then disappearing when it should have passed, can stay with you for years. And to this day, I still do not know exactly what I saw behind us on that road. When I was very young, around 5 or 6 years old, in a small village in Mexico. The other happened years later in my room, when I was old enough to know I was not just imagining things in the same way a little kid might. Both were short. Neither one lasted very long. But both of them scared me badly enough that I still think about them. The first one happened when I was playing outside near my house. I was only about 5 or 6, and we were living in a little village in Mexico at the time. It was the kind of place where everything felt familiar, because everyone knew the streets, the houses, and the usual people walking around. When you are that young, your world is very small. Your house, your street, your family, maybe a few neighbors, and the places you are allowed to play. That was my whole world then. I was outside by the house, just playing the way little kids do. I do not remember exactly what I was playing with or what I was doing in that moment, but I remember being close enough to home that I felt safe. I was not lost. I was not far away. I was not wandering in some strange place where I could easily get confused. I was near my own house, in a village I knew. Then a woman walked up to me. She was dressed in what looked like a nurse's outfit. At least that is what I remember thinking as a child. She had that kind of appearance, like someone connected to a doctor or a clinic. Maybe she was wearing white or something that made her look medical. I cannot remember every detail of her clothing now, because I was so young, but the impression was clear enough that I remember thinking she looked like a nurse. She came up to me and told me the doctor needed to see me. That was all it took to scare me. I do not know why I reacted that way so strongly. Maybe because I was a little kid and any adult stranger telling me to go somewhere felt wrong. Maybe because the word doctor sounded serious and frightening. Maybe because I had not been sick, had not been told by my parents that a doctor wanted me, and did not understand why this woman was suddenly talking to me. Whatever the reason, something inside me immediately said no. I got scared and started walking back home. I did not scream. I did not run right away. I just turned and began moving toward my house because that was where safety was. When you are a child and something feels wrong, you do not have a full plan. You just go back to the place where your parents are, or where you think they are. Home is the only answer you understand. But the woman followed me. That is the part that makes the memory so disturbing to me. If she had only said it once and then left, I could maybe think she had mistaken me for another child. Maybe she really was connected to some doctor. Maybe there was some confusion. But she did not just walk away. She followed me and kept insisting that I come with her. She kept trying to convince me that the doctor needed to see me. I remember feeling more scared with every step. She was an adult, and I was a small child. That power difference is hard to describe unless you think back to how big grown-ups seemed when you were little. They did not have to grab you to be terrifying. Just following you and telling you to go with them was enough. I knew I did not want to go. I knew I had not been told to go anywhere. I knew my parents had not said a nurse or doctor would come for me. Something about it felt wrong in the way that children understand danger before they have words for it. So I kept heading home. Sometimes I wonder if it was a dream. I have asked myself that many times because memories from early childhood can be strange. A child can have a dream and remember it like it happened. A child can hear a family story and later feel like they remember it themselves. A child's mind can mix fear, imagination, and real events together. I understand all of that. I know I was only 5 or 6, but I do not think it was a dream. The memory has a real-world feeling to it. I remember the outside air, the feeling of being near my house, the sudden fear when she spoke, and the decision to go home. I remember her following me. I remember the way she kept insisting. It did not have that floating, shifting feeling dreams usually have. It felt like something that happened in the middle of an ordinary day, and that is what makes it harder for me to dismiss. I still do not know who she was. Maybe she really was a nurse or someone connected to a local doctor, and maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe she had been sent to get a child and got the wrong one. Maybe she thought she knew my family. Maybe in a small village, adults sometimes did things in a more informal way, and what felt terrifying to me as a child had a simple explanation. But another possibility is darker. Maybe she was trying to lure me away. That thought is the reason the memory still makes me uneasy. A strange woman walked up to a little kid and said a doctor needed to see him, then followed him when he tried to go home. That is exactly the kind of thing adults warn children about. I do not know what would have happened if I had gone with her, and I am glad I never found out. The second experience happened later, and this one is harder for me to explain as a dream or a childhood misunderstanding, because I was older, awake, and doing something normal. I was in my room playing guitar. It was not a scary setting. I was not asleep. I was not walking through a dark hallway. I was just in my room playing music, focused on my guitar. Then I felt something on my arm. At first, it felt like a muscle spasm in my bicep. That is what I assumed it was. Bodies do weird things sometimes. A muscle jumps, twitches, tightens, or spasms for no clear reason. It is annoying, but not usually scary. So when I first felt that little pressure or movement, my mind went to the normal explanation right away. But in the back of my mind, I had another thought. That kind of felt like someone squeezing my arm. It was not enough to make me panic at first. It was just a weird little thought that passed through my head. I still tried to tell myself it was a muscle spasm. But there was something about the sensation that did not feel like a twitch from inside my arm. It felt external. It felt like pressure coming from the outside, like fingers closing around my bicep. A few seconds later, it happened again. Only this time, there was no confusing it with a muscle spasm. I felt a full, invisible hand squeeze my arm. I mean, individual fingers and everything. It was not vague pressure. It was not a little twitch under the skin. It felt exactly like a hand had wrapped around my bicep and squeezed. I could feel the separate fingers pressing into me. I could feel the grip. And it was much stronger than the first sensation, about 3 times harder, like whatever had touched me decided to make sure I understood that it was not my muscle. That moment sent pure adrenaline through me. There is something uniquely terrifying about being touched by something you cannot see. Seeing a strange figure across a room is scary, but at least it is over there. You can point to it. You can run from it. You can keep your eyes on it. But when something invisible touches you, especially when it grabs you with the clear pressure of fingers, the fear becomes immediate and personal. It is already close. It is already on you. You do not know where it is because there is nothing to look at, but you know it can reach you. I jumped up instantly. I did not sit there calmly trying to understand it. I did not wait to see if it would happen again. I reacted the way my body told me to react. I jumped to my feet and started swinging. I punched the air, not because I could see something to hit, but because I needed whatever it was to know I was not just going to sit there and let it touch me. I yelled, "Fuck you, bitch. Get out of my house. I ain't afraid of you." That was probably not the most peaceful response, but in that moment, fear turned into anger. I think sometimes anger is the only thing that keeps you from completely losing it. If I had only let myself feel fear, I might have frozen. Instead, I got loud. I cursed at it. I swung at the empty air. I tried to make myself sound bigger and braver than I actually felt. But the truth is, I was scared. Because right after that, I ran outside. I did not stay in the room. I did not keep playing guitar. I did not search the house for an explanation. I got out and waited outside for my parents to come home. That says everything. I could yell that I was not afraid, and maybe part of me meant it in that second. But I was afraid enough that I refused to stay inside alone after it touched me. Outside felt safer, because at least there was open space. Inside, my room suddenly felt too closed in. Every corner felt like it could be hiding something I could not see. The air itself felt untrustworthy. If something invisible could squeeze my arm while I was just sitting there playing guitar, then what else could it do? Would it touch me again? Would it follow me from room to room? Was it still standing near me, waiting for me to react? I did not want to find out, so I waited outside until my parents got home. I have thought about that experience many times, and I still cannot find a normal explanation that feels right. A muscle spasm can explain the first feeling, maybe, but it cannot explain the second one. A spasm does not feel like individual fingers pressing into your skin. It does not feel like an invisible hand closing around your arm. It does not respond to your own thought of, it kind of felt like someone squeezing me by squeezing harder a few seconds later. That is what made it so disturbing. It was almost like whatever it was heard my thought or understood that I was trying to dismiss it. The first touch was light enough that I could tell myself it was my body. Then the second touch was strong and clear, like it wanted to remove any doubt. I do not know if the two experiences are connected. The woman in the village and the invisible hand in my room feel like completely different kinds of strange. One could have been a real person with bad intentions, which is scary in a very human way. The other felt like something unseen crossing a line and physically touching me, which is scary in a different way. But both left me with the same feeling that something had come too close. With the woman in Mexico, the danger was that she wanted me to come with her. With the invisible hand, the danger was that it was already close enough to grab me. I still wonder about the woman sometimes. I wonder who she was, where she wanted to take me, and whether there really was any doctor at all. I wonder if my child instincts protected me that day by making me afraid before I could reason myself into obeying an adult. Maybe I only avoided something bad because I got scared and walked home. And I still wonder about the hand. I wonder what would have happened if I had not yelled. I wonder if it was trying to scare me, get my attention, or prove that it was there. I wonder if it was something in the house, something passing through, or something attached to me for a moment. I do not know. I just know that I felt it. Both memories are short, but they stayed sharp. A woman dressed like a nurse walking up to a small child in a Mexican village, saying the doctor needed to see him, then following him when he tried to go home. An invisible hand squeezing my bicep while I played guitar, first lightly like a spasm, then hard enough to feel every finger. I cannot prove either one to anyone. Maybe the first was a dream, though I do not think it was. Maybe the second was some strange nerve or muscle thing, though it felt nothing like that when it happened. All I know is that both times, my body knew something was wrong before I had a full explanation. The first time, I walked home. The second time, I yelled, swung at the air, and ran outside. And honestly, I think both reactions might have been the right ones. On the night my dad died, my mom and I were upstairs cleaning. My dad was already on hospice in the house we were living in at the time, and to make things easier for him, we had set him up in the living room on the ground floor. He could not really be moved around much anymore, and the living room had become the center of everything. It was where he rested, where we checked on him, where the quiet heaviness of what was happening seemed to gather. Anyone who has had a loved one on hospice at home knows how strange a house can feel during that time. It is still your home, but it also becomes something else. It becomes part bedroom, part sick room, part waiting room, and part place of goodbye. The house itself already had a strange feeling to it. It was a Victorian-style house built sometime in the 1800s, and it had all the things old houses have. Hardwood floors, solid wood doors, odd drafts, strange corners, and that deep, settled feeling that comes from standing for more than a century. It was beautiful in some ways, but it never felt completely right to me. Some old houses feel warm and full of character. This one felt heavy. It felt like it had seen too much. The air in it never felt fully still, but it also never felt peaceful. The house was drafty, which is important because it gave us a way to explain some things, at least at first. Old houses breathe. Wind gets in where it should not. Doors shift. Frames are not always square anymore. A cold breeze can move through a place like that in ways you do not expect. So when something happened with a door, our first thought was not automatically ghosts or signs. There were always practical explanations to reach for. We had propped one door up to close off one area of the space. It was not properly hanging on hinges at the time. It was basically leaning in its door frame, set there to block off part of the room or hallway. It was a solid wood door, heavy and old, not some light, hollow modern thing. The house had hardwood floors too, so if that door fell, it should have made a huge sound. A solid wooden door falling onto hardwood in an old house is not something you miss. It should have slammed. It should have echoed. It should have startled anyone nearby. My mom and I were upstairs cleaning when it happened. At least, that is when it must have happened. We came downstairs and found the door on the ground. That stopped us immediately because neither of us had heard it fall. We had been in the house. We were not outside. We were not somewhere far away where the sound could have been missed. A heavy, solid wood door had fallen onto hardwood floors, and there had been no crash, no slam, no loud bang from downstairs. We had heard nothing. That alone was strange. Then we noticed the cat. The cat was sleeping on the chair next to my dad. He had not run, he had not jumped up, he had not made a sound. Anyone who has cats knows they react to sudden loud noises. A heavy door hitting a hardwood floor should have scared him badly, especially because he was right there near my dad in the living room. He should have bolted, or at least lifted his head and stared. But he was still asleep, calm like nothing had happened. That made it even harder to explain. If the door had fallen normally, the sound should have shaken the room. My mom and I should have heard it. The cat should have reacted. My dad was lying there on hospice, and the whole room should have felt disturbed by that kind of crash. But it was as if the door had simply been placed on the floor without making any noise at all. My mom and I started looking around the house. That was when we found the basement door blown open. I do not know how to describe the feeling that gave me. The house was drafty, yes, and I knew wind could move through old spaces strangely. But seeing that basement door open made the whole thing feel different. It was like something had moved through the house. The prop door was down. The basement door was open. The air felt wrong. It was not the normal kind of drafty house weirdness. It felt like something had shifted. And then, about 30 minutes later, my dad passed away. That timing is what has always stayed with me. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the door fell because the house was old and drafty. Maybe the basement door blew open because of pressure or wind moving through the house. Maybe the cat did not react because somehow the door fell softly, though I still do not understand how a solid wood door could hit hardwood without making a sound. Maybe grief makes people connect things that are not really connected. But it happened 30 minutes before my dad died. It felt like something changed in the house before he left. After he passed, everything became quiet in that terrible way that only happens after someone dies in a house. The air feels different. People speak softly, if they speak at all. Even the normal sounds of the home seem wrong. The person is still there physically, but the life that filled the room is gone. It is hard to explain unless you have felt it. The room becomes both too full and too empty at the same time. I called a friend to come over for consolation. I needed support. My mom needed support. We were in that living room where my dad had just passed, waiting for my friends to arrive. The house felt still, but not peaceful. My mom and I sat there together, surrounded by grief, waiting for someone living to come through the door and break the silence. Then we heard knocking. It sounded like someone was at the front door. Both my mom and I thought my friends had arrived. That was the obvious explanation. We were expecting them, and the knock sounded like it was coming from the front of the house. I got up and went to check. No one was there. I opened or looked toward the front door, expecting to see my friends standing outside. But there was nobody. No car pulling up, no person on the porch, no one walking away. Just the outside and the empty entryway. Then the knocking kept going. That is when it stopped feeling like someone knocking at the front door and started feeling like the sound was around us. It was still knocking, but it did not seem to have one clear place anymore. It was not just from the door. It felt like it was moving through the space, surrounding us, somehow. My mom heard it too. This was not something I imagined alone in grief. We both heard it, and we both had the same first thought that my friends had arrived. But when no one was there, and the knocking did not stop, The fear and sadness mixed together in a way I will never forget. It was not like a horror movie knock. It was not loud enough to be theatrical or violent. It was just there, steady enough to make us react, real enough that we checked the door, and strange enough that there was no easy answer once we found no one outside. In that moment, sitting in the same living room where my dad had just passed, it felt like he was saying goodbye. I know some people will hear that and think it is grief. Maybe they are right. When someone dies, especially at home, your mind reaches for meaning. You want signs. You want to believe they are still near. You want one last moment, one last message, one last confirmation that they are not just gone. I understand that. I know grief can make ordinary things feel supernatural. But I also know what happened. The door fell without a sound. The cat did not move. The basement door was blown open. 30 minutes later, my dad died. Then after he passed, my mom and I heard knocking that sounded like someone at the front door, but no one was there. And the knocking seemed to continue around us. That was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me in that house. And that house had already never felt right. The history of the place did not help. The house had been there since the 1800s, and I was told that back then, when people who owned houses like that died, the living room was sometimes used as a funeral room, or at least something like that. I do not know all the exact historical details, but I know that in older times, people often kept the dead at home before burial. Families did not always send bodies away immediately the way many people do now. Parlors and living rooms were sometimes the places where the dead were laid out, where family came to mourn, where people said goodbye. So the idea that my dad died in the living room of a house that may have once been used that way made the whole thing feel heavier. It was not just any room. It was a room in an old Victorian house, a house old enough to have held generations of grief before ours. Maybe other people had died there. Maybe other families had sat in that same kind of silence, waiting, crying, praying, listening to the sounds of the house around them. Maybe my dad's passing was only one more death added to the long memory of the place. And there was more darkness connected to that house, too. My dad's significant other had also ended her life in that very house. Unexpectedly, that is not a small thing for a place to carry. I do not know how much a house can hold on to, but if places can absorb pain, that one had plenty. Death, grief, illness, shock, and all the strange energy that comes with people leaving the world in painful ways. Maybe that is part of why the house never felt right to me. Maybe it had too much sorrow inside it. Even before my dad passed, I had closed more doors and cupboards in that house than I had opened. That sounds like a small thing, but when you live somewhere, you know what you do and do not leave open. You know which cabinet you used, which door you shut, which room you walked through. In that house, things were always open. Doors, cupboards, things that I did not remember touching. Things that should have stayed closed. It happened enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. I would find myself closing things all the time, almost like the house was constantly being used by someone else just out of sight. It made me feel watched, or maybe just not alone. That is why the night my dad died did not feel like one isolated strange event. It felt like the house had been building toward something. The old drafts, the open doors, the cupboards, the heavy feeling, the history, the deaths connected to the house, all of it made that night feel like the house was part of what happened. Not causing it, exactly, but witnessing it, reacting to it. I have tried to be reasonable about it. The prop door could have fallen because of a draft. The basement door could have blown open from air pressure. The knocking could have been something settling in the walls, or someone outside who left before I got to the door, or some sound traveling strangely through an old house. Grief could have made everything feel connected. But none of those explanations fully sit right with me. A solid wood door on hardwood should have made a loud noise. The cat should have reacted. The knocking should have had a person behind it. And the timing, all of it happening around my dad's final moments, feels too meaningful to ignore. I think it was my dad saying goodbye one last time. Maybe he moved through the house as he was leaving. Maybe the door falling, the basement door opening, and the knocking were all part of something we do not understand. Maybe when someone dies in a place that old, in a room that has likely held death before, the boundary between what we can see and what we cannot becomes thinner for a little while. Or maybe he simply wanted us to know he was still there for one more moment. I do not know. What I do know is that my mom and I were upstairs cleaning while my dad lay in hospice in the living room. We came downstairs to find a heavy door on the floor, even though neither of us heard it fall. The cat slept beside my dad like nothing had happened. The basement door was blown open. 30 minutes later, my dad passed away. And while my mom and I sat in the living room waiting for my friends to arrive, we heard knocking that no living person seemed to be making. That house had never felt right. But on that night, it felt like it opened up just enough for my dad to leave. And maybe, in his own way, to knock goodbye before he was gone. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. My girlfriend and I were staying in a hotel in Galway, and even before anything happened, the place already had a slightly creepy feeling to it. It was not some abandoned building or anything dramatic like that. It was a real hotel, open for guests, normal enough that people stayed there without thinking too much about it. But it was in an old building, and old buildings have a way of carrying a mood that newer places do not. The halls feel narrower. The floors make sounds under your feet. The walls seem thicker in some places and thinner in others. Even when a place has been renovated and turned into a hotel, you can still feel its age underneath everything. I would not say I believe the hotel was haunted. I do not really believe in ghosts or the supernatural in general. I am the kind of person who tries to find a normal explanation first, even when something seems strange. Old buildings make noises. People in nearby rooms bang into walls. Pipes shift. Furniture settles. Small objects can fall if they are balanced badly. There is usually some kind of explanation if you are patient enough to look for it. But what happened in that room is something I still cannot explain. That night, my girlfriend and I were both in bed. I do not remember exactly what we were doing, whether we were reading, watching videos, or just sitting there winding down for the night, but we were both awake. That detail matters to me, because this was not something that happened while I was half asleep. I was not dreaming. I was not waking up from some strange noise and filling in the gaps. We were both sitting up, fully conscious, in the same room, doing normal things. The room was quiet in that hotel room way. Maybe there were distant sounds from the building, maybe a faint noise from outside, but nothing unusual enough to remember. We were not scared. We were not telling ghost stories. We were not sitting there waiting for something weird to happen. It was just an ordinary night in a slightly creepy old hotel. One of our AirPods cases was sitting on one of the bedside shelves. It was not in the middle of the floor. It was not in anyone's hand. It was not being touched. It was just sitting there, where small things sit in hotel rooms when you empty your pockets or put your stuff down for the night. There was nothing strange about it. It was a small object on a shelf, and neither of us was paying attention to it. Then, all of a sudden, it went flying across the room. Not falling. Flying, that is the part I keep coming back to. If it had simply slid off the shelf and dropped, I probably would not still be thinking about it. That would have been weird, maybe, but explainable. Maybe it was too close to the edge. Maybe the shelf was uneven. Maybe one of us bumped something without realizing it. But this was not a soft drop. The case did not just plonk onto the floor beside the bed. It shot across the room like someone had smacked it hard. It moved with force. It went far enough that it was impossible to pretend it had just tipped over naturally. It flew halfway across the room. The motion looked deliberate, like an invisible hand had struck it from the side. That is what made the moment so unsettling. Not that an object moved, but the way it moved. There was energy behind it. Direction, speed, it behaved like something had hit it. My girlfriend and I both saw it. For a second, I think we just froze. When something impossible happens right in front of you, your brain does not immediately accept it. It tries to grab the nearest explanation even before you can speak. I remember looking from the place where the case had been to the place where it landed, trying to understand the path it had taken. There was no one near it. Neither of us had touched it. Nothing else had moved. The room had not shaken. There was no loud bang, no vibration, no sign that something had hit the wall or shelf. It was just suddenly across the room. I picked through the possibilities right away because that is what I do. I do not like jumping to supernatural explanations. I wanted there to be something normal that I had missed. Maybe the shelf was loose. Maybe the case had been balanced in some strange way. Maybe the lid or hinge had snapped open and somehow launched it, even though that made no sense. Maybe there had been some vibration from the wall. Maybe someone in the next room slammed something hard against the other side, and the impact knocked it off. That was the only explanation I could come up with that even came close. Maybe there had been some sort of impact on the other side of the wall. Maybe someone in the next room had hit the wall, or a door slammed hard enough to shake the shelf, or furniture was pushed into the wall with force. If the shelf was attached to that wall, maybe the vibration could have knocked the AirPods case off. It was a small object, after all. Small things can move if something hits hard enough nearby, but even as I thought it, I knew it did not really work. If something had hit the other side of the wall hard enough to launch that case halfway across the room, we would have heard it. We would have felt it. There would have been a thump, a bang, a vibration through the bed or wall. Something. The force required to make that case fly like that would not have been silent. Old hotel walls are not magic. An impact strong enough to send an object flying should announce itself. There was no impact. No sound from the next room. No shake. No movement anywhere else. Just the case being thrown. That is what made the silence afterward feel so heavy. The room had been normal 1 second. Then suddenly something had moved with force, and then everything went still again. It was almost worse that nothing followed. If other things had started flying around, at least we would have known we were in the middle of something. If we had heard someone laughing next door, maybe we could have blamed a prank or noise from another room. If the shelf had fallen, maybe we could have blamed a bad fixture. But there was nothing else. One object flew across the room, and then the room returned to normal, like nothing had happened. I do not remember either of us immediately making a joke. It did not feel funny. It felt like we had both just watched something that did not fit the rules of the room. A small, ordinary object had behaved as if someone invisible had hit it hard, and because we were both awake and both present, I could not simply explain it as a dream or a moment of confusion. That is another thing that makes it harder to dismiss. If I had been alone, I might have doubted myself more. I might have wondered if I had imagined the force of it. Maybe I looked up after hearing a sound and only thought it had flown farther than it did. Maybe my memory exaggerated it. But my girlfriend was there too. She saw the same thing. We could look at each other and know we had both witnessed it. There is something both comforting and disturbing about that. Comforting because you are not alone in the experience. Disturbing because it means it was not only in your head. I still do not believe in ghosts in any strong way. Even after this, I cannot honestly say I became someone who thinks every old building is haunted or every strange movement is caused by spirits. I still think most things have ordinary explanations. But this incident sits in a strange place for me, because the ordinary explanations do not feel good enough. Objects do fall. Objects do slide. Vibrations do move small things. But objects do not usually launch themselves halfway across a room from a bedside shelf while two people are sitting awake nearby, without any sound, impact, or obvious cause. The hotel being old probably made it feel creepier, but I do not think the building's age is the explanation by itself. An old building can creak. It can settle. It can make pipes groan, doors shift, floors pop, and windows rattle. But none of those things explain a small case being thrown with enough force to look like it had been smacked. If anything, the oldness of the building only made the moment feel more uncomfortable because it already had that heavy atmosphere. The incident seemed to match the mood of the place too well. I have wondered if there was something wrong with the shelf. Maybe it was slightly angled, and the case slid off, hit something, bounced, and traveled farther than it seemed. But I remember the movement as too forceful for that. It did not tumble down and bounce away. It went flying. It had a clean, sudden motion. It did not look like gravity slowly pulling an object off balance. It looked like impact. I have wondered if one of us accidentally caused it. Maybe a blanket moved, maybe a cable caught it, maybe a hand brushed something without us realizing. But it was on a bedside shelf, and neither of us was touching it. If either of us had caused it, we would have known. And even then, accidentally knocking something usually sends it off the shelf and down, not halfway across a room. I have wondered if there was some pressure change, a door closing somewhere, airflow, anything. But an AirPods case is not a feather. It is not going to be blown across a room by a soft draft. The room was not full of wind. Nothing else moved. There was no sign of sudden air pressure strong enough to throw an object. So I am left with the same thing I had that night. I do not know what happened. That is the part that unsettles me more than any ghost theory. I do not need to believe a spirit picked it up and threw it. I do not need to believe the hotel was haunted. But I also cannot explain the motion I saw with my own eyes. The case was on the shelf, untouched. Then it flew across the room like it had been struck. My girlfriend saw it too. No one was near it. No impact came from the other side of the wall. Nothing shook. Nothing else moved. It just happened. And then it was over. We stayed in a semi-creepy hotel in an old building in Galway, had a quiet night in bed, and watched a small object suddenly launch itself across the room. That is the whole story. It is not huge. It is not full of shadow figures, voices, or doors slamming by themselves. But sometimes the smaller incidents are the ones that stay with you because they are so specific. A shadow can be imagination. A noise can be the building. A feeling can be nerves. But an object flying across the room while two people are awake and watching is harder to put away neatly. I still do not believe in ghosts, but I cannot explain that AirPods case. A good friend of mine had passed away a couple of days before this happened, but at the time, we did not know exactly how he had died. We only knew he was gone. Later, we found out it had been a drug overdose. But when the dream happened, that information had not reached us yet. His death was still sitting in that awful, unclear place where everyone knows something terrible happened, but nobody has the full story. It felt sudden, confusing, and unreal, the way it always does when someone is there one day and gone the next. I was grieving, but it did not feel like the kind of grief that comes out cleanly. It was not only sadness, it was shock, worry, anger, confusion, and that strange, helpless feeling you get when you keep thinking there must have been some moment where things could have gone differently. I kept thinking about him, wondering what his final hours had been like, wondering if he had been scared, wondering if he had known what was happening. Since we did not know the cause yet, my mind had nowhere to settle. There were too many unanswered questions. Then I had the dream. I do not mean a normal dream that feels foggy and random. This one felt different right away. It felt loud. That is the only way I can describe it. The whole dream had a force to it, like everything in it was turned up too high. The emotions were loud. The space around me felt loud. Even my own voice felt louder than it should have been. It did not feel like my mind casually drifting through images while I slept. It felt like I was somewhere, actively searching. In the dream, I was screaming his name. I was screaming it over and over, with everything in me. I was not calling casually, and I was not just looking around for him like someone in a normal dream. I was desperate. I was shouting so hard that it started to hurt me physically. My throat felt raw. My chest hurt. My whole body felt like it was being strained by the effort of trying to reach him. It was the kind of scream that comes from panic, not anger. I needed him to hear me. I needed to find him. I do not know where I was at first. The dream did not feel like any normal place I could name. It was not clearly my house or a street or somewhere from my memory. It felt like a space between places, empty in some ways, but not completely empty. There was a sense of distance, like I was moving through something wide and unclear, calling for him with no idea if he could hear me. Then I found him. He was standing in some kind of line. That image has stayed with me more than anything. He was not alone, but he did not seem to be with people in the normal sense either. There were figures around him, standing near him in the line. They were shaped like humans, but they had no faces. They were different sizes and different shapes, like people reduced to outlines or forms. They did not have clear identities. No eyes, no mouths, no expressions. Just human-like shapes, waiting there with him. The whole thing felt wrong, but not in a horror movie way. It did not feel like a monster chasing me. It felt more like I had walked into a place I was not supposed to be. A place where things were happening that I did not understand, and where I did not belong. The line seemed important, but I did not know what it was for. I did not know where it led. I only knew my friend was in it. He looked confused and scared, but he was trying not to show it. That detail broke my heart, even in the dream. He had this look like he did not fully understand where he was or what was happening, but he was doing his best to act like he had it under control. It was so much like something a real person would do. Not screaming, not breaking down, just trying to manage the fear quietly, because there were others around. He seemed startled, lost, and worried, but also like he was pretending to be okay. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was, but I did not fully believe it. The words came out like a reassurance, but his face and energy told a different story. He looked like someone trying to convince both of us. Like if he said it strongly enough, maybe it would become true. I wanted to grab him, pull him out of the line, and bring him back with me, but I could not. I do not remember being able to touch him. I do not remember even knowing how close I could get. There was this invisible boundary in the dream, something that made me feel like I could speak to him, but not interfere with where he was. Then he told me he was not alone. He pointed to the figures standing beside him. The moment he pointed at them, they looked my way. That was one of the most unsettling parts. Until then, the faceless figures had felt like background presences. Strange, yes, but not focused on me. They were just there, waiting in the line with him. But as soon as he pointed them out, their attention shifted. Even without faces, I could feel them turn toward me. Their bodies faced me, or their presence did, and I felt suddenly seen by things I did not want to be seen by. My friend looked surprised to see me too. That confused me. In the dream, I had been screaming his name and searching for him with everything I had, but when I found him, he seemed like he had not expected me to be there. It was not like he had called me. It was not like he had been waiting for me. He looked shocked that I had reached him at all. That made the whole dream feel even more real, because it did not follow the normal logic of a comforting dream where a lost loved one appears just to give you peace. This felt like I had broken into a moment I was never meant to witness. And I felt unwelcome, not from him exactly. I do not think he wanted me gone. But the place itself felt unwelcome. The figures felt unwelcome. The air around us felt like it was pushing me out. It was as if I had stepped into a waiting room for something beyond life, and whatever rules governed that place did not allow visitors. I was not supposed to be there, and the longer I stayed, the more aware of that I became. He started to talk about something. I wish I could remember exactly what he was going to say. That part haunts me, because it felt important. He had begun speaking, like he was about to explain something or tell me something I needed to know. Maybe he was going to tell me where he was. Maybe he was going to tell me what happened. Maybe he was going to say goodbye. I do not know. The memory cuts off right there, and I have never been able to recover what he was about to say. Because suddenly, a door in my house slammed. It slammed so hard that it woke me up. I came out of the dream instantly, not slowly, not gently. I was yanked awake by the sound. It was loud enough and violent enough that my body reacted before my mind understood where I was. For a second, I still felt like I was half in the dream, still carrying the panic of screaming his name, still feeling the attention of those faceless figures. Then I realized I was in my house, awake, and the sound of the door slamming was not part of the dream anymore. That was what scared me most. The dream itself had already felt too real, but the door slam made it feel connected to the waking world. It was like something had cut the conversation off, like I had been pulled out right as he was about to tell me something, or like something did not want me there and forced me back. I know doors can slam for normal reasons. A draft, pressure change, a loose latch, someone moving around the house. All of that is possible. I understand that. If the dream had not happened first, maybe I would have barely thought about it. But waking from that dream, at that exact moment, to a door slamming hard in my actual house, made everything feel wrong. I lay there with my heart pounding, trying to separate the dream from reality. But they did not feel separate. The dream had felt physically real. My screaming had hurt. The place had felt loud. My friend had looked like himself, but also like someone who had just arrived somewhere he did not understand. The figures around him had felt aware. The moment they turned toward me, I felt their attention. Then the door slammed, and I was awake before I could hear what he was trying to say. It did not feel like a normal grief dream. I have had dreams about people before. Most of them feel like dreams. They jump around, change locations, include strange details, and then fade when you wake up. This one stayed sharp. It had a structure to it. I was searching for him. I found him in a line. He was with faceless figures. He was scared, but pretending not to be. He told me he was not alone. The figures looked at me. I felt unwelcome. He began to speak. A door slammed and woke me. It felt like I had reached him somewhere. I am not saying that is definitely what happened. I know grief can do powerful things to the mind. When someone dies suddenly, especially when the details are still unclear, your brain tries to make sense of it. It creates scenes. It searches for closure. It may put the person in a place that feels like waiting, because you yourself are waiting for answers. Maybe the faceless figures were just my mind's way of showing death, or transition, or all the unknown people who die and pass into something we cannot see. Maybe the door slam was coincidence. Maybe the whole thing was just a dream caused by grief, stress, and shock. But it did not feel that simple. When we later found out he had died from a drug overdose, the dream felt even heavier. He had looked confused and scared, like someone who did not fully understand what had happened to him. He had looked like he was managing, trying to act okay in a place that was not okay. That detail matched the feeling I had before knowing the truth. It made me wonder if some part of him really was in a state of confusion, standing in some kind of line, not alone but not comfortable either. I keep thinking about those figures. They had no faces, only human shapes. They did not seem like friends, but he said he was not alone and pointed to them. Maybe they were others who had passed. Maybe they were guides. Maybe they were just shapes my mind created, because I could not imagine what would be around someone after death. But the way they looked at me when he pointed toward them still makes me uneasy. It felt like they noticed me all at once, and their attention carried a warning, like I had come too far, like I was not allowed to keep watching. Then the door slammed. I wish I knew what he was about to say. That might be the part that bothers me the most. The dream did not end after he reassured me. It ended right as he began talking about something. It felt unfinished, like a message was cut off, like I had been given a brief chance to see him, but not enough time to understand. Maybe that was for a reason. Maybe I was only supposed to know that he was not alone. Maybe I was only supposed to see that he was scared, but still there, still himself in some way. Or maybe I was never supposed to see any of it, and the door slam was whatever force pushing me back into my own world. I do not know. All I know is that a couple of days after my friend passed, before we even knew he had died from an overdose, I dreamed that I was screaming his name so hard it hurt. I found him standing in a line with faceless human-shaped figures around him. He looked confused and scared, but he was trying to act like he was okay. When I asked if he was all right, he said he was. Then he told me he was not alone and pointed to the figures beside him, and every one of them seemed to look straight at me. I felt unwelcome there. He looked surprised that I had found him. Then he started to tell me something, and before I could hear it, a door in my house slammed so hard that it woke me up. I have had dreams before, but none that felt like that. None that felt so real, so loud, and so connected to something happening outside the dream. I still do not know what it was, and maybe I never will. But sometimes I wonder if, for a few moments, I found my friend somewhere between here and wherever people go next. And maybe something there noticed me before I could stay too long. A long time ago, my now ex-boyfriend's brother was murdered. I do not want to get too deep into the details of the murder itself, but it was sudden, violent, and terrible. It left a heaviness around everyone connected to him. When someone dies that way, it does not feel like a normal loss. Not that any death feels normal, but murder has a different kind of weight. There is shock, anger, fear, grief, and this awful sense that something has been ripped open before anyone was ready. People do not just mourn the person. They also carry the horror of how it happened. About a week after the murder, something happened in the place where my ex and I were living. Even now, I remember it in a strange way because it all happened so fast, but at the same time. It felt like slow motion. That is hard to explain unless you have been truly terrified. Your body reacts in seconds, but your mind records certain details with painful clarity. It is like everything stretches. The sound of an animal, the way a room looks, the feeling in the air, the cold that comes over you before you even understand why you are scared. I woke up because of my cat. He was hissing and growling. Not a normal little annoyed cat sound. This was serious. He sounded terrified and aggressive at the same time, like he had seen something that made every instinct in him go into survival mode. If you have ever heard an animal react to something it truly fears, you know the difference. Cats can be dramatic, but this was not random drama. His growling came from deep inside him, and the sound immediately made me feel like something was wrong. I got up to see what was going on. At first, I was still half asleep, trying to understand why he was making that noise. Maybe he had seen another cat outside. Maybe there was a bug, a mouse, or some sound in the room that had scared him. I did not yet understand that what I was walking into was going to stay with me for years. I went toward the kitchen and turned the lights on. The next few seconds were chaos. My cat came running from the bedroom at full speed. He was not just running normally. He was bolting like something was chasing him. He came flying into the kitchen so fast that he nearly tried to run straight through the wall. That is how panicked he was. He did not seem to know where to go. He was scrambling all over the place, desperate to get out. His body was low and frantic, claws slipping, eyes wild. Every part of him focused on escape. He wanted the window. But he was so scared that he could barely manage it. He was trying to get out, but his panic made him clumsy. He scrambled around, crashing and slipping, like he could not process the space around him. I remember watching him and feeling my own fear rising because animals do not fake that. A cat might spook at a noise, sure, but this was different. He looked like he was fleeing for his life. Finally, he managed to get through the window, and then he was gone. He bolted outside and disappeared. For a moment, I was left standing there in the kitchen, trying to understand what had just happened. My cat had gone from growling and hissing to running like pure terror had taken over his whole body. I had no idea what he had seen or felt, but whatever it was, he wanted out of that place immediately. Then I turned and noticed the kitchen. The drawers were open. Things were in disarray. It looked like someone had been rummaging through the kitchen. Not in a huge, destroyed house kind of way, but enough that I knew it was wrong. Drawers that should have been closed were pulled open, Items were not where they should have been. The kitchen had that disturbed look a room gets after someone has been moving through it without caring how they leave it behind. That alone would have scared me, but then I saw the hamster cage. We had a hamster cage on a shelf above the sink. At night, the cage was always shut, and we kept a towel over it. That was the routine. It was not left open. The hamster was not allowed to run loose at night. Everything was closed and covered the way it always was before bed. But the cage was open. The towel had been moved, and my hamster was not inside. Then I saw him on the floor. He was inside his hamster ball, rolling around the kitchen. That was the moment my fear changed into something deeper, because I could not understand how that was possible. A hamster does not open a closed cage, get out, somehow get into a hamster ball, and start rolling around the floor by itself. The cage had been shut. The ball had not been set up for him. The towel had been over the cage. There were too many steps between where he should have been and where he was. It was not just one weird thing. It was everything together. My cat going wild with terror. The drawers open, the kitchen in disarray, the hamster cage open, the hamster somehow inside his ball on the floor. All of it had happened while we were asleep. I stood there, trying to take it in, and then the atmosphere changed. That is the best way I can describe it. The air in the room became heavy, absolutely heavy. It felt like something had pressed down over the kitchen, like the space itself had become thicker. I suddenly got very cold all around me, not just a little chill from a draft. It felt like cold wrapped around my body. It came with this awful sense that I was not alone. There are moments when your mind tries to stay logical, but your body already knows something is wrong. This was one of those moments. I did not stand there and calmly inspect the drawers. I did not try to catch the hamster or call the cat back. I did not search the kitchen to see if a person had broken in. The feeling that came over me was too intense. It was like every part of me was screaming to get out of that room. So I ran. I ran back to the bedroom, not exactly screaming, but making this horrible groaning sound out of fear. It was like I could not get a proper scream out. The sound came from somewhere deep in me, half panic and half disbelief. I was terrified in a way I had never been before. My ex woke up. Like I said, all of this happened very fast. From the cat's growling to me running back into the bedroom, it could not have been long, but it felt like a whole nightmare had unfolded in a few seconds. I was trying to tell him what had happened, trying to explain the cat, the kitchen, the drawers, the hamster, the cold, but I do not even know how clear I was. Fear makes it hard to speak normally. Then, my ex did something that told me he understood the situation in a way I did not. He got up and went to sit on the floor. Then he started lighting candles around himself. He kept saying his brother's name. Nick. He told Nick over and over to leave us alone. That is when the whole thing connected back to the murder in a way that made my stomach drop. His brother had been killed only about a week earlier. The grief was still fresh. The shock had barely settled. And now here we were, in the middle of the night, with the animals terrified, the kitchen disturbed, a hamster somehow out of his closed cage and into his ball, and the air feeling cold and heavy around us. My ex did not act like this was just a random, scary moment. He acted like it was Nick. He sat there with those candles and kept telling him to leave us alone, over and over. Not angrily exactly, but firmly, like he was speaking to someone who was there. Like he believed his brother's presence had come into the house and was causing the chaos around us. I do not know if he felt something I did not, or if he simply believed it because of the timing. But the way he reacted made the whole thing feel even more real. Eventually, things calmed down. The heavy feeling lifted, or at least faded enough that we could breathe again. The cold did not feel so sharp. The panic in the house slowly settled, but the memory of it did not leave me. I could not stop thinking about the cat. That was the part that haunted me most at first. The way he ran into the kitchen like he was escaping something. The way he almost tried to run through the wall. The way he scrambled for the window and bolted outside as soon as he could. Animals know things. I really believe that. A person can convince themselves they imagined a sound or misread a room. But an animal's fear feels honest. My cat was not performing. He was not reacting to a story. He did not know about grief or murder or the idea of a spirit coming back. He only knew something had scared him so badly that he had to get out of the house. And then there was the hamster. I still cannot explain that. The cage was closed. The towel was over it. He was supposed to be inside. Somehow, he ended up in his hamster ball on the floor, rolling around the kitchen. That sounds almost silly when you say it quickly, but standing there and seeing it after everything else was terrifying. It was so specific, so impossible, in such a small, practical way. A hamster cannot do all of that alone. The kitchen drawers being open made it feel like someone had been looking for something, or moving through the room with purpose. Maybe a living person could have done that, but then, where were they? How did they get in and out without us knowing? Why would they open a hamster cage and put the hamster in its ball? Why did the cat react the way he did? Why did the air suddenly feel freezing and heavy? Nothing about it made sense. After that night, the house never felt the same to me. It already had sadness around it because of what had happened to Nick, but after that, it felt like the grief had turned into something active, like it had a shape, like it could move through rooms and disturb things. I do not know if it was really Nick. I do not know if he was angry, confused, scared, or simply trying to be noticed. If it was him, I do not think he came in peacefully. The energy felt too chaotic for that. It felt like something full of shock and pain. Maybe that makes sense after a murder. A sudden violent death is not calm. It is not gentle. If anything remains afterward, maybe it is not always soft footsteps and quiet goodbyes. Maybe sometimes it is panic. Disruption, animals reacting, things opening, coldness, a presence that does not know how to settle. We moved a while later, but the weird things did not completely stop right away. That was another part that made the situation harder to dismiss. It was not only one bad night that could be blamed on grief and fear. Other strange things still happened. Not always as intense as that night, but enough to make me feel like something had followed, or like the door had been opened in some way and did not close immediately. I still think about that night because of how fast everything happened and how many impossible details were packed into it. I woke up to my cat hissing and growling. I went to check. He came tearing from the bedroom like something was after him, so terrified he nearly ran into the wall before escaping through the window. The kitchen drawers were open. Things were out of place. The hamster cage above the sink, normally closed and covered with a towel, was open. My hamster was somehow in his ball, rolling around on the floor. Then the air turned heavy and cold, and I ran back to the bedroom, making a sound I had never heard myself make before. My ex lit candles and told his murdered brother to leave us alone. And after a while, it stopped. I do not know what else to call that except a haunting, or at least something very close to one. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was fear. Maybe the mind fills in blanks when someone dies violently. But the cat's terror was real. The open drawers were real. The hamster in the ball was real. The cold heaviness in the room was real enough. that I ran from it. Whatever happened that night, it felt like something had entered the house. And whether it was Nick or something connected to the pain of his death, I hope it eventually found peace. Because what we felt that night did not feel peaceful at all. I grew up in an Edwardian house, the kind of old house that always seemed to have more space in it than it should. The ceilings were high, the rooms had that slightly grand feeling older houses can have, and there was a long hallway that ran through the place like a spine. During the day, it was just home. It was familiar, lived in, and normal. But at night, or even in the quiet part of the evening, that same hallway could feel different. Sounds carried strangely through it. A creak from one end could seem to come from somewhere else. A door shifting in its frame could make you pause. Old houses have a way of making you listen, even when you do not want to. My dad was a very talented pianist. Music was part of who he was. He had a room next to the hallway where his piano was kept. And because of that, the sound of piano in our house was not unusual. If I heard someone playing, my first thought was always my dad. That was simply where my mind went, because he was the one who played. The piano room belonged to him in a way, not officially maybe, but emotionally. It was the room where that part of him lived. The piano itself had a strong presence in the house. It was not just another piece of furniture. When you grow up with a musician in the family, certain sounds become part of your childhood. The way fingers move over keys, the soft pause before a song begins, the deep notes that seem to settle in the floorboards, the higher notes that drift through doorways and up the hall. I was used to hearing my dad play, and I knew the general sound of it. I knew the difference between a random note being hit and actual playing. This was not the sound of a key settling or a string making some odd noise. It was music. One evening, when I was about 14, I was walking down the hallway. I remember knowing my dad was not supposed to be home. He was working an afternoon shift that day, and he finished at 10 p.m. That was not a vague guess. I knew his schedule. He was at work. He should not have been anywhere near the piano room. But as I walked down the hallway, I heard the piano playing. At first, it did not scare me. That is what makes the memory so strange. My brain accepted the sound before it questioned it. I heard piano music coming from the room where the piano was kept. And because that was a normal sound in our house, I immediately thought my dad must have come home early. Maybe his shift had changed. Maybe he had been let off sooner than expected. Maybe I had misunderstood the time. There were plenty of ordinary explanations before anything supernatural needed to enter my mind. The sound was clear enough that I did not think I imagined it. It was not a distant vibration or one single accidental note. It was piano playing. It came from the direction of the room next to the hallway, exactly where it should have come from if my dad had been sitting there. I do not remember the exact tune anymore, but I remember the certainty that someone was playing. I walked into the living room where my mom was and said, I didn't realize Dad had come home early. I said it casually, because to me, that was the obvious explanation. I had heard the piano, so Dad must have been home. There was no fear in the question, no suspicion. I was not trying to set up a ghost story. I was only making a normal comment about something I thought had happened. But my mom looked at me and said, he's still at work. That was the moment everything changed. It is strange how quickly a normal sound can become impossible. 1 second, the piano was comforting because it meant my dad was home. The next second, it became something I did not want to hear. My mind tried to catch up. If Dad was still at work, then who was playing? My mom had not been in that room. I had not been in that room. There was no one else who should have been sitting at the piano. And yet, I had heard it. I still remember walking toward the piano room after that. The hallway felt longer than usual. I was 14, old enough to know better than to panic over every strange noise, but young enough that fear could still grab me hard when something did not make sense. The room with the piano was right there next to the hall, and I knew I had to open the door. Part of me wanted to prove my mum wrong somehow. Maybe Dad had come in quietly and she had not noticed. Maybe someone else was in there for some reason. Maybe there was a radio on, or the sound had come from outside, or from another room, or from somewhere that would make sense once I looked. But another part of me already knew. I opened the door. The room was completely dark. That image has stayed with me for years. The door opening, the darkness inside, and the sudden absence of the sound. There was no one at the piano. No figures sitting on the bench. No movement. No explanation. Just the piano in the dark room, silent now, waiting like it had never made a sound at all. The feeling I had in that moment is hard to describe. It was not screaming terror. It was more like my stomach dropped and the air around me turned cold. I had been so sure of what I heard. I had heard the piano playing from that room. I had walked to my mum and spoken as if Dad being home was a fact. Then I opened the door and found nothing but darkness. Old houses are already full of echoes. That is what I told myself later. Maybe sound traveled strangely through the house. Maybe someone nearby had music playing, and because of the hallway and the rooms, it somehow sounded like it came from our piano. Maybe a television or radio was on somewhere. Maybe my mind heard a few house noises and shaped them into piano music because I associated that room with my dad. These are the kinds of explanations people reach for when they do not want to sit with the unknown. But none of them ever felt right. The sound had come from the piano room. I knew where it was coming from. I had grown up in that house. I knew how sounds moved through it. I knew the difference between music outside and music inside. I knew the sound of that piano. And I knew my dad was at work. That is the part that unsettled me most. If I had only heard one note, I could have blamed the instrument itself. Old pianos can make small noises. Wood shifts. Strings may settle. Maybe something inside changes with temperature. But this was not one note. It was playing. It sounded like a person was there, using the keys, making music. And the person who should have been there was not home. I do not remember anything else happening that night. No doors slammed. No shadow moved across the hallway. No voice called my name. Nothing dramatic followed. In some ways, that made it creepier. The house simply gave me one impossible moment, then went quiet again. It let me hear the piano, let me believe my dad had come home, let my mum tell me he was still at work, and then let me open the door to a dark, empty room. That was all. But it was enough. Because after that, the piano room never felt exactly the same to me. I could still go in there. It was not like I refused to enter forever. But the memory stayed attached to the doorway. Every time I passed that room in the hall, some part of me remembered the sound. I remembered being so sure my dad was inside. I remembered the darkness. I remembered the quiet that came after the door opened. A house with a piano has a special kind of silence when no one is playing. It is not like a room without an instrument. A piano sits there with the possibility of sound inside it. Even when it is quiet, you know what it can do. You know the music it has held. You know the person who usually brings it to life. So when you hear it playing and then find no one there, the silence afterward feels almost alive. I have wondered over the years whether it was connected to the house itself or to my dad in some strange way. He was alive, of course. He was just at work. So it was not like hearing the music of someone who had passed away. That might have made the story fit a more familiar ghost pattern. This was different. It was the sound of a living person's music happening when that living person was nowhere near the instrument. Maybe old houses store things. I do not know if I believe that in a literal way, but sometimes it feels possible. Maybe rooms where certain actions happen over and over again hold on to them. Maybe footsteps repeat in hallways. Maybe voices linger in kitchens. Maybe music stays in a room where someone has played often enough and with enough feeling. Maybe, just for a few seconds, I heard an echo of my dad playing that did not belong to that exact moment. Or maybe someone else was there. That thought is less comforting. A dark room with a silent piano is one thing. A dark room where someone invisible had just been playing is another. I did not feel a clear presence when I opened the door, at least not one I can describe, but I felt the wrongness of it. I felt the gap between what I had heard and what I found. That gap is where the fear lived. My mom's response made it real, too. If she had said, yes, he came home, or that was the radio, or I was playing something, the whole thing would have ended there. But she told me Dad was still at work, and she was right. He was not home. The explanation I had built in my mind collapsed in one sentence. I think that is why the memory remains so sharp. It was a simple moment, but it had no satisfying ending. I heard the piano. I assumed my dad was home. My mom said he was not. I opened the piano room door. It was dark and empty. There was nothing else to investigate. No one to blame, no answer waiting in the room, only the piano. Even now, I can recall the feeling of standing there in the doorway, looking into complete darkness, trying to make my mind accept that the room was empty. I can still remember how strange it felt that the music had stopped, as if whoever or whatever had been playing knew I was coming. Maybe that is not what happened. Maybe the timing was coincidence. But that is how it felt, like the sound stopped because I opened the door. I know this is not the most dramatic ghost story. Nobody appeared in front of me. Nothing touched me. Nothing followed me down the hall. But sometimes the quiet experiences are the ones that stay with you the longest. A sound you know. A room you know. A person you expect to be there. Then, darkness. Silence. And the knowledge that the person was miles away at work. That evening in the Edwardian house, I heard my dad's piano playing from the room beside the hallway. I told my mom I had not realized he had come home early. She told me he was still at work. And when I opened the door to the piano room, I found only darkness. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.